We are getting ready to start our conversation with Danny Shorten. And if you don't know Danny, you need to do some research. Danny is the founder of Optimain Limited, and he is based in the UK. So he gave us this amazing chapter on STEM, creativity, and the question of gender. So, Danny, I have my first question for you.
Okay.
Tell us a bit about your job. What do you do on a daily basis?
Well, I'm an engineer, I suppose. Firstly, or sort of fell into engineering. It wasn't something I sort of wanted to do from being a young boy, but I found myself in engineering and found that I was good at it and I enjoyed it. There were many engineers who I would aspire to, and still do aspire to be as capable as they are in the practical sense, and in the sense of mathematicians or in the sense of physics or chemists. I was never really good at any of those subjects individually, but I was always interested in things. And I think that's what engineers are, people who are interested in things and how they work and how to maybe offer solutions to problems. And in helping people to do that, I get a lot out of that. But what do I actually do? Well, my role within Optimain has been to broaden the field of understanding and the ability to reduce our need to maintain equipment unnecessarily. So to maintain uptime, to reduce the likelihood of failure, and to, well, what really motivates me is people not having to get their tools out of their tool bags to fix things that shouldn't otherwise have broken. And the thing that motivates me is the fact that so many people get injured or lose their lives when they're doing this work. We talk about in the marine world about enclosed spaces, for instance, and there are a number of enclosed machinery spaces where there have been fatalities simply because people have gone in to maintain, and at some later stage it was found that the need to maintain wasn't really there. They were following some previous process, or they're just turning the handle, as it were. So what I do is try and find ways not to do work. I don't want to get rid of engineers, but I'd like to focus them on what's happening in 6 months' time, in being able to plan to avoid work, and not to repeat mistakes, and not to effectively just turn the handle without realizing whether you're adding any value. Now, my sphere of engineering is lubrication and condition-based maintenance, condition monitoring. That's where I got the interest in here. But what I do with Optimain, and what I've done with Optimain, is there's some training, there's some consulting, but there's basically walking into places where I've never been before, different factory environments, either on ships or on land, even in space, though I didn't get the chance to go, but I have worked on some of those exploration projects in the past. And looking at situations from my perspective to see if there's a little bit of opportunity to add something to make it better. And that's been very much at the heart of my activity. Yes, we have to do the mundane, but the goal is all those wonderful problems to solve, and some of them we can solve using the sort of skills I've developed, not all of them, but having a different eye, a different view on a problem very often leads you to solve them, I've found. Plus you get to see stuff every day that is different.
It's always like within our field, it's always a new challenge. It's always something different. So that's one of the things that I totally love about the lubrication field. It's always
no day is the same.
No, it's not.
No day is the same.
Except maybe your shoes. That's the only thing that may, stay the same, because those safety boots have to be on all the time.
Well, we've got to wear them, and actually, we talk about the sort of gender balancing throughout the whole of this operation. And one of the things that used to unfairly impact on girls, I suppose, was the fact that men naturally have a stronger capability because they're bigger framed. Whereas with health and safety nowadays, we have means of getting round that. So physical strength is not needed at all in regard to engineering. It's more about the agility of the mind and the ability to solve problems.
Yeah,
And knowing
definitely.
where to ask someone else as well. This is something I found is you're
Hmm.
not an island. One of the things being in a company like mine is the fact that I know I can't solve every problem. Some of
Hmm.
them I can, but I know I can't solve all of them. But I probably know someone who does.
Yes.
It might be, for instance, yourself, Sanya, or it might be Bob
Hmm.
Latino, or it might
Oh
be
yeah.
somebody from one of the bearing companies. So we can collectively find answers to most of the problems, or at least move us towards those solutions.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I totally loved about your chapter, Danny, is that you spoke about the different types of machinery, and particularly ones that have been designed for women, but not
Yeah.
by women. And I'm like,
Oh,
now that makes so much sense,
yeah.
you
There's
know?
loads of examples of that. I
Oh
mean, the
my gosh,
one
yes.
I put in was the device for measuring the mammogram for
Hmm.
carriage, which my wife has unfortunately had to experience. And she told me by looking me straight in the face, she said this must have been designed by a man because no woman would ever have designed it to do
Oh.
it like that. It's completely uncomfortable. Yes, it achieves a goal, but it's not fit for purpose really.
Hmm.
And then that got me thinking, and I started looking, and there's lots of examples of that. In fact, we spoke recently to one of the other contributors who was into
Hmm.
road safety and crash testing
Right.
and things like that. And I think from recollection, the crash test dummy that was being used since motor vehicles were ever tested was always a frame of a male figure with a
Yeah.
male mass, a male centre of gravity.
Uh-huh.
Percent of the occupants of that driving seat or that passenger seat were not really considered during safety testing. That's
Mm.
changed now. We're
Yes.
aware of it now. But it's surprising how recent that is.
Yeah, and I think what it has it been within the last 2 years or so? It's
It,
and
it may
I
well
think
be as recent as that, which
yeah,
flabbergasts me. It absolutely floors me to the floor. I'm jaw dropping. Is this
yeah,
really? Is this how far or how little we've come?
it's
But lots of
insane.
designs, I think, are designed with a male hat on, as it were,
Hmm.
simply because we didn't think like that long ago, and
Yes.
now it's starting to change.
Yeah.
Um, and I like the fact that we're changing because it's more inclusive. Diversity generally,
Hmm.
whether it's race, gender, orientation, height, even weight, even, we can't consider things to be normal. In
Uh-huh.
fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I remember somebody telling me a tale that maybe in the 50s or 60s, and I'm going to get the details wrong, but the message is right. That it may have been the US, it may have been another military, but they basically measured all their fighter pilots and designed a cockpit around the average of all of them. The
Yes.
result was it fitted none of them because the average did not meet anybody's needs. So that shows us that we have to build for variety. Variety is what we have to build for, not for a
Mhm.
typical standard. And that again was a real surprise. I thought that was an interesting
That
statistic.
is very interesting because it just tells me that when we try to collate everything and try to find, let's do it this way, and this is the only way that it should be done, that's never the right answer. There are
Well, no,
so
there are
many
always
ways.
different ways to solve problems, and I'm a big believer in standardisation generally. So that if you build something over in
Hmm.
your country and send it to me, I can screw things into the
Right.
holes using the same pieces. And I think on education we need to standardise and we need to make sure that if we're talking to people with different languages that they're not somehow disadvantaged by that,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. But the
Yeah.
gender thing for me was quite important. Having a daughter and obviously being married to a beautiful wife, that to see that there were glass ceilings, should we say, that you kind of didn't even see as a man, and I think that's the thing is having awareness,
Yep.
because most men, to my knowledge, are not particularly interested in protecting that gender gap. You know, there's no motivation to sort of exclude. It's just not being talked about.
Yep.
And when you talk to
Awareness.
people, or when I talk to people about it anyway, they're surprised
Mm-hmm.
because they think, oh, of course we should think like that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course we should,
Do
you know,
this. Yeah.
a set of overalls should be tailored according to the person who's wearing it. It shouldn't just be straight up and down, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a movement I'm very passionate about.
Yeah.
You know, I live in a house with two girls, and I can't really avoid them, really. You know.
Oh boy, yeah. So what was your, and I think you kind of summed it up when you spoke about everything just now, your inspiration to actually, get others involved in the field of STEM. How would you inspire others by that?
Well, the STEM in of itself, the science, technology, engineering, and maths. I think what we tend to find is that people believe they've got a natural ability to do this, and if they don't get it the first time round, it's not for them. And I don't believe that. I was completely useless at maths when I was at school. I didn't get calculus. I must have been looking out of the window the moment they gave the critical key information that everybody else seemed to get that I didn't get. But I found it later on when because I think I'm more of a visual learner.
Right.
I learn by watching other people and understanding the reason and why they, application engineering, which kind of leads you into lubrication
It does.
sciences a little bit. So looking at, if I go back to when I was not scared by the thought of
Yeah.
having to do examinations, I love to take things apart and put them back together again and build, using play kits, Lego, Meccano, whatever these things are. So I always had an inquisitive sort of eye. In fact, much to the pain of my parents, because I sometimes took things apart and couldn't put them back together again.
That's all right.
You
It's a
think like
learning
vacuum
process.
cleaners. Well, it is, but you've got to be, ask for parental permission before. Sometimes is a good method. So I had the inquisitive, but when I got into the learning around, when you get serious about learning around 12 or 13 years old, whatever the method of learning for me didn't match the way I was interested in learning.
Yeah.
So I kind of switched off between the ages of 13 and 17. Now, luck or situation told me I needed to go and work when I left school, which I'd left school at 16, and I was very fortunate. I got an apprenticeship locally,
Yes.
which paid a moderate wage, but at least it was a job. And in my town, jobs were becoming scarce at the time because it was right at the end of what you might call the industrial sort of period. It was most industries post-war in Europe and certainly in the UK were on the wane. Yeah, we were still putting through school to put people into factories, but the jobs weren't there. So we all come screaming out of school and there was no jobs for everybody.
Yeah.
But I managed to get an apprenticeship. And I kind of bumbled along a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go to college one day a week because that was the rule. But when I finished the end of the first 2 years, because I had a longer apprenticeship, it was just the type of apprenticeship, a lot of the lads I trained with, I say lads because there weren't any girls on it,
Oh my gosh.
but they'd finished then, so I had to choose a new course, which was all the people who had done exams at 16 and came out at 18, so they go to a higher level. So I was now, as an 18, 19-year-old, in with people 3 years younger than me. And I'm sure you're young enough to remember that age gap is massive at that time. There's no 19-year-old within reach of a 16-year-old. You don't want to be anywhere near them. So I moved from the back row of the school to the front row and actually started listening to the tutor. And started getting good marks and started really realising I was actually quite enjoying it because I was getting good at it. Anyway, a couple of 3 years later, I was getting distinctions in everything, and I went on to do night school and did my qualifications properly, and actually got it. I actually found it interesting. That was the key. And it wasn't science or technology or engineering or maths that got me interested. It was being inquisitive. I'd regained that thing I'd lost during school, which is actually a bit of I kind of want to know. I want to understand this a little bit more. And suddenly time disappears. You're not thinking, I've got to do this for an hour. You're going, gosh, it's tea time already, and I'm still working. And it was a kind of flipped on its head. So I wouldn't say I was drawn to STEM subjects.
Mm-hmm.
STEM subjects were the means by which I got.
Wow.
They were the tools, if you like, to enjoy this degree of inquisitiveness. And I wasn't inquisitive 12 hours a day. It was just generally there, whereas it hadn't been before. But it was all blokes. I wasn't a female to be seen
Mm.
at all. I'm not in the workplace. They were in the company, and you dealt with them. But they also had jobs where there was no men. There was no men in the typing area where they used to write all the reports. The engineers used to go out on the road. There were men, well, they were all men. They'd bring their reports back in scrawled handwriting, and the girls
boy.
who were in the office had to decipher it, type it up, and they was really genders that way.
Mm-hmm.
Typists, engineers.
Mm.
There was very few areas in our company where you could say there was a clear balance.
Right.
No, there weren't anywhere. Even in the kitchen, there was the girls who did certain roles and the boys did certain roles. Never did they mix. And we had our own canteen where I worked, so there was that. Anyway, round the houses we go. Short answer is STEM was the tools,
Mm-hmm.
not the goal. They were definitely useful. And once I got my head around the maths, that was easy. Engineering really is just a way of describing how things work, so that's cool. Science is a broad base of physics, maths, biology if you want. There are human sciences, geographical sciences. There's just it's technical stuff, detail, facts, that sort of stuff. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've talked to you before, I think the A is missing out of it because it should be STEAM, although it kind of doesn't work, if you know what I mean, because it feels like you're going back. But to get to the point of being creative in engineering, you've got to get quite high up in the organisation, because otherwise you can be driven by process. Whereas I think bringing that creativity further into the realms of the new starters so that they can actually feel they're adding something of themselves to it, I think that's probably a key going forward. And I think the females of the species tend to bring that with them whether you want it or not, because it just happens. So I'm a big fan in bringing like getting rid of gender gaps completely in engineering, because actually they're complementary skill sets at the end of the day. The girls shouldn't try to be the boys shouldn't try and be the girls, but they bring in where they cross over. That Venn diagram is actually quite crossed in the middle, in terms of skills.
Mm-hmm.
But the things where they don't cross over are useful because they bring new skills. And we haven't got an industrial revolution anymore. That's really at the wane. We've got a different type of revolution, which is about problem solving and linking machinery and talking about data and talking about solutions. We've got a fairly strong experience over the last, I guess, 250 years of how to move metal around and how to move electricity around. But now we're into data, aren't we? We're into connectivity. We're into, designing the human out in many ways, not necessarily to make them redundant, but to allow them to do things which are more rewarding, should we say.
Yes, rewarding and creative, because those are things that you cannot program yet.
No, creativity is the one thing that differentiates. Somebody once said to me, whatever you do, don't get into anything they can export or anything a computer program can do, because otherwise you'll find you've got an end of the road. And the one thing in everything is creating something from where something didn't exist before. I'm into my music as that's my hobby, and whilst I spend a lot of time copying other musicians, the moment you actually develop your own ideas, and you wonder where they came from, there's almost a magic to it, because nothing pre-existed. Where did that spark come from, and which ideas are going to work?
Yeah.
Some of the things we see them in trends in public life, in popular life. Which song's going to be the one that people all get behind? And very often it's not the one which everybody thinks might.
Yeah.
Things can grow of their own, and I think trends in engineering, trends in building, trends in product development, there are elements which are are kind of unknown. They're mysterious. If they weren't mysterious, we'd be able to manipulate markets far more easily than we can do now. and there's enough manipulation going on
Oh,
that we're
yeah.
not clinically aware of. We're getting better at it. Um, so yes, any inability to add creativity to these processes, I think, is a way to become empowered and more interested. You know,
Yes.
some people actually just want to be part of the process. There's different people types, as you know. There are people
Hmm.
who are thinkers, people who feel, people like are tactile. Some people are sound orientated. Some people like need a lot of motivation. Some people like to work alone. You know, there's all sorts of different
All
types.
sorts of
Thankfully, we're
things.
not all the same.
Yes.
But we all smile the same. We all love the same. We all are born the same. We all pretty much die the same. There's so much that we're the same, and yet we always focus on the difference.
Yes.
And actually, the difference should be a positive and not a negative. And it's one thing that gets me really angry inside is when I see people focusing negatively on the differences
Hmm.
between whoever it is, whatever it is. I don't want to get into a discussion about all that stuff. It's been done a million times before, but we seem to want to focus on the things that divide us.
Hmm.
And it's a real problem. The human species is actually doing that. I mean, there's all that stuff going on in Ukraine at the moment, which is not actually positive in any way to
Nope.
anybody,
Nope.
and they're focusing on the difference.
Hmm.
I'm going off on one. I do apologise.
That's okay. That's okay, Danny. I know we could talk for the whole day. Definitely.
I can talk to you all day, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. But that's it for our chapter. Be sure to check out Danny's chapter in the book. Like it was so eye-opening for me because of the examples that he gave and all of the references. And of course, bringing his unique perspective to the book. I love that. Thank you, Danny, for everything you do and for sharing your story with us.
Well, I'd like to thank you in return for being the glue that binds it all together, because it wouldn't have happened without your tenacity and energy. So I think we're all very appreciative that we were
You are
we were
most
part of it.
welcome. All right. Thank you so much. And look out for the book.
I'm looking forward to my copy of it as
Oh,
well.
yes, definitely.